Hi, friends. All right, I know you've been waiting, and it is time to read Chapter 4 of Flat Stanley by Jeff Brown. So, remember, Stanley got flat from a bulletin board. His first adventure was to see his friend in California, so he got put in an envelope and shipped off. And then Arthur, his brother, was feeling kind of down, and so Stanley tried to help him by being a kite, remember? And then Arthur got attention from some kids and ended up leaving Stanley all tangled in a tree. So Stanley was really upset about that. So that's where that chapter left off. So now we are on chapter 4, and it is called The Museum Thieves. So let's keep reading. Let's see what it's about. Mr. and Mrs. O.J. Dart live in the apartment above the lamb chops. Mr. Dart was an important man, the director of the famous Museum of Art downtown in the city. Stanley Lambchop had noticed in the elevator that Mr. Dart, who was ordinarily a cheerful man, had become quite gloomy, and he had no idea what the reason was. So there he is in the elevator. And then at breakfast one morning he heard Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop talking about Mr. Dart. I see, said Mr. Lambchop, reading the paper over his coffee cup. Is that still another painting has been stolen from the famous museum? It says here that Mr. O.J. Dart, the director, is at his wit's end. Oh dear, are the police no help? Miss Lambchop asked. It seems not, said Mr. Lambchop. Listen what the chief of police told the newspaper. We suspect a gang of sneak thieves. These are the worst kind. They work by sneakery, which makes them very difficult to catch. Here they are reading the newspaper. However, my men and I will keep trying. Meanwhile, I hope people will buy tickets for the policeman's ball and not park their cars where signs say don't. The next morning, Stanley Lambchop heard Mr. Dart talking to his wife in the elevator. These sneak thieves work at night, Mr. Dart said. It is very hard for our guards to stay awake when they've been on duty all day. And the famous museum is so big we cannot guard every picture at the same time. I fear it is hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. Suddenly, as if an electric light bulb had lit up in the air above his head, giving out little shooting lines of excitement, Stanley Lambchop had an idea. He told it to Mr. Dart. Stanley, Mr. Dart said, if your mother will give her permission, I will put you and your plan to work this very night. Miss Lambchop gave her permission. But you will have to take a long nap this afternoon, she said. I won't have you up till all hours unless you do. That evening, after a long nap, Stanley went with Mr. Dart to the famous museum. Mr. Dart took him into the main hall where the biggest and most important paintings were hung. He pointed to a huge painting that showed a bearded man wearing a floppy velvet hat, playing a violin for a lady who lay on a couch. There's the painting. There was a half-man, half-horse standing behind them, and 3 fat children with wings were flying above. That, Mr. Dart explained, was the most expensive painting in the world. There was an empty picture frame on the opposite wall. We shall hear more about this later. Mr. Dart took Stanley into his office and said, It's time for you to put on your disguise. I already thought of that, Stanley Lambchop said, and I brought one. My cowboy suit. It has a red bandana that I can tie over my face. No one will even recognize me. Not in a million years. No, Mr. Dart said. You will have to wear a disguise that I have chosen. From a closet, he took a white dress with a blue sash and a pair of shiny little pointy shoes, a wide straw hat with a blue band that matched the sash, and a big wig and a stick. The wig was made of blonde hair, long and done in ringlets. The stick was curved at the top, and it, too, had a blue ribbon on it. In this shepherd dress disguise, Mr. Dart said, you will look like a painting that belongs in the main hall. We don't have cowboy pictures in the main hall. Stanley was so disguised he could hardly speak. I will look like a girl. That's what I will look like, he said. I wish I'd never had my idea. He was a good sport, though. He put on the disguise. Back in the main hall, Mr. Dart helped Stanley climb into the empty picture frame. Stanley was able to stay in place because Mr. Dart had cleverly put 4 small spikes in the wall, 1 for each hand and foot. The frame was a perfect fit. Against the wall, Stanley looked just like a picture. Except for one thing, Mr. Dart said. Shepherd dresses are supposed to look happy. They smile at their sheep and at the sky. You look fierce, not happy, Stanley. Oh gosh, look at Stanley. And he's able to be in the picture frame because he's flat, remember? So they wouldn't even be able to tell. Stanley tried hard to get a faraway look in his eyes and even to smile just a little. Mr. Dart stood back a few feet and stared at him for a moment. Well, it may not be art, but I know what I like. He went off to make sure that certain other parts of Stanley's plan were taken care of, and Stanley was left alone. It was very dark in the main hall. A little bit of moonlight came through the windows, and Stanley could just make out the world's most expensive painting on the opposite wall. He felt as though the bearded man with the violin and the lady on the couch and the half-horse person and the weaned children were all waiting, as he was, for something to happen. Time passed, and he got tireder and tireder. Anyone would be tired this late at night. Oh, just like Mrs. Reed. Oh, sorry. Anyone would be tired this late at night, especially if he had to stand in a picture frame balancing on little spikes. Maybe they won't come, Stanley thought. Maybe the sneak thieves won't come at all. The moon went behind a cloud, and then the main hall was pitch dark. It seemed to get quieter with the darkness. There was absolutely no sound at all. Stanley felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle beneath the golden curls of the wig. Creak! The creaking sound came from the right, out of the middle of the main hall, and even as he heard it, Stanley saw, in the same place, a tiny yellow glow of light. The creaking came again, and the glow got bigger. A trap door had opened on the floor, and 2 men came up through the hall. Stanley understood everything all at once. These must be the sneak thieves. They have a secret trapdoor entrance into the museum from the outside. That is why they had never been caught. And now, tonight, they were back to steal the most expensive painting in the whole world. He held very still in his picture frame and listened to the sneak thieves. This is it, Max, he said. This is where we art robbers pull a sensational job while the civilized community sleeps. Whew, that was a hard word. Right, Luther? Said the other man. In all this great city, there is no one to suspect us. Ha ha, thought Stanley Lambchop. That's what you think. And look. There's the trapdoor, and there's the robbers. And they made these pages black, so it's like the night. The sneak thieves put down their lantern and took the world's most expensive painting off the wall. What would we do to anyone who tried to capture us, Max? The first man asked. We would kill them. What else? His friend replied. That was enough to frighten Stanley. And he was even more frightened when Luther came over and stared at him. There they are. This sheep girl, Luther said. I thought sheep girls were supposed to smile, Max. This one just looks scared. Just in time, Stanley managed to get a faraway look in his eyes again and smile, sort of. You crazy, Luther. She's smiling, and what a pretty little thing she is. That made Stanley furious. He waited until the sneak thieves had turned back to the world's most expensive painting, and he shouted in the loudest, most terrifying voice, "Police! Police! Mr. Dark, the sneak thieves are here!" The sneak thieves looked at each other. "Max," said the first one, "I think I heard the sheep girl yell." "I think I did too," said Max in a quivering voice. "Oh boy, yelling pictures? We both need a rest." "You'll get a rest, all right," shouted Mr. Dart, rushing with the chief of police and lots of guards and policemen behind him. "You'll get arrested. That's what. Ha ha ha." The sneaky thieves were too mixed up by Mr. Dart's joke and too frightened by the policemen to put up a fight. Before they knew it, they'd been handcuffed and led away to jail. The next morning, the office of the chief police, Stanley Lambchop, got a medal. The day after that, his picture was in the newspaper. And that was the end of chapter 4. I hope you enjoyed this chapter and tune in tomorrow for the last chapter of our book. It's chapter 5. So I will see you then. Bye, friends.